I'm going to kind of start slow rolling us, if that's okay, into the time here. Um, I hesitate to say this because I don't want to make promises I can't keep. But I mean, if we really move through and I go quick, then we can get early to lunch. So that's like being somebody who's doing a thing right before lunch is a really dangerous place to be put. So I don't take it personally that that's where I'm at. But no, I'm kidding. Let me welcome y'all to this workshop breakout session that we're calling the Church and Disability. Thank you so much. So the Church and Disability, which is a couple of big topics when you think about it, the Church and Disability. This is only an hour and 15 minutes, and again, maybe even a little shorter. I promise you we are not going to get through every possible thing that we could. We will barely do it justice, but I am excited to just share a few things that, and I'll say a little bit more about this in a second, that my colleagues and I, my coworkers and I are learning about the church and disability based on some academic research that we're doing. And by the way, we believe that research isn't really worth much if it doesn't actually make a difference. In the real world, if y'all have heard of the university ivory tower and a bunch of people sitting around thinking about important things but doing nothing about it, that is not our hope for my colleagues and I at Baylor. And so this is an attempt to kind of present some stuff to y'all that I hope will be thought-provoking, that I hope will, I've certainly learned a lot of new things in recent days on this stuff. Hopefully you will too. But then to also give some suggestions, some possibilities, or even it's a biblical word, even some exhortations. You know what an exhortation is? It means it's a challenge that's kind of supposed to be encouraging, but it's really like it's a challenge. So hopefully some friendly exhortations will come out of that as well. So that's what we're going to do today. My name is Jason Lashana, and I direct work at Baylor that we call our Collaborative on Faith and Disability. And I'm part of a larger center that does a whole bunch of work in different areas of disability research and training and resourcing. And as of last Tuesday, we got a new name. We're called I don't know if you can see it, it's a little small, but the Baylor Center for Disability and Flourishing is the name of the center that I'm part of. So my day job is right across the freeway here, and so it's a pleasure to be with y'all today. By the way, what I'm going to do is kind of presentation style, but please do, if you see something that didn't make sense or you want to know a little bit more about something, feel free to just pop your hand up, and I'm happy to do that. So don't be afraid to interrupt me. I really mean that. I promise if you do it, I'll be like, oh, great, let's chat. So fair enough? Cool. Well, before we dive in, can I pray for us? And then we'll start. Lord, we do thank you for this gathering. We thank you for all those who've come from near and far to really ask this question: what does it mean to live our lives in a way that is not centering ourselves? Thank you that your gospel calls us to our neighbor, to those nearby and far away. And we also freely admit that in our own wisdom, we don't always know how to do that. And so thank you that you meet us where we're at, and it is out of your grace and your love that we can love and serve our neighbor in a variety of different ways, just as we are loved and served. I pray that as we have this conversation about disability, about our church communities, would it be full of grace and learning, and I pray for just some curiosity even to be sparked about what these kinds of things might look like in our churches in Texas and around the country and around the world. So thank you for this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. Have a seat if you're coming in. Cool. All right. Well, let's dive in. So I'm going to tell you what we're going to try to do today in the next hour or so. So we've got a couple different goals. So first, what I want to do is, before talking about the church and disability, I want to kind of try to define what we're talking about when we talk about disability. This is something that's often skipped over, by the way. And you're going to find, I said defining disability sort of. You're going to see why I say sort of in a second, but we'll do that. Then I want to do kind of a little snapshot of a few of the kinds of things that we're learning in our research at Baylor around the church and disability, and specifically focusing on three kind of areas Like I said, there's so much more that we could get into, but 3 areas that are kind of some threads, some strands that I kind of want to weave together a little bit to help us think about these things. And that's on pastors and families and churches in general. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit. The next thing we'll do is zoom out a little bit and just ask this question, okay, what are we learning about the church and disability? You may have other learnings beyond what I focus on, by the way, at the end. In fact, you probably will, but I want to highlight a few of those. And then, like I promised at the beginning, I want to end with a few friendly exhortations, which means, friendly encouragements, challenges, things to think about, things to maybe do, because it wouldn't be a workshop at a conference like this if there wasn't like a go and do likewise kind of thing. So we'll try to end that way. Fair enough? All right, that's what we're going to do. But before we get much further, actually, I want to go back one slide. So I found this. If you go on the internet and you look up pictures of, before I keep going, I'm going to set my timer. This is my accountability device here that's going to let me know if I'm going too long. If you like search, pictures on disability in the church or whatever, you actually will get a lot of pictures kind of like this of somebody who, maybe they're kind of with somebody, maybe they're alone, maybe it's somebody in a wheelchair, maybe it's somebody with Down syndrome. Sometimes they're really smiling and happy, but sometimes they're kind of like this. This struck me because of this slide. So I want to talk about my own personal experience with disability. And this is not a generic picture. This is me at the church that my family and I were part of about 8 years ago. When I had been diagnosed with cancer and was not able to walk at all for quite a while, and was in a wheelchair. And interestingly enough, loving, beautiful, wonderful congregation that actually did not have good seating for wheelchair areas. And so this is me. It's kind of hard to tell, but this is me in this wheelchair, and there's a wall with glass and people kind of worshiping in church on the other side. What I love about this picture, there's a lot that I don't like, but there's a lot that I love about it, is that the people in here are wonderful. Loved me, we're a good community. In fact, after this particular service, we had a time of prayer for me to not die from cancer and those kinds of things. But I was still separated, right? Kind of in the back, which was odd. And this was the first time I'd gone to a service like that. So disability is not this idea out there. It is a personal experience. I know for me and probably for many of us here. So my own experience. As a dad, my son, our oldest son, is autistic. And so I've experienced as a parent and a caregiver in that way. I mentioned my own, so I've kind of used some type of mobility device. We were connecting on AFOs earlier, so I got the brace and the cane that I move around with. And I've used some type of mobility device, either those or a wheelchair for, about 8 years now. So that's my own experience. But then also as a pastor. So if you're really paying attention, you notice I have the fancy title Reverend in front of my name, which, you go to some classes and they pray over you and there you are, you're Reverend. It's really more than that. But as a pastor, so before coming to Baylor, I was a campus pastor, a chaplain at a college in Southern California for a bunch of years, and also have worked on pastoral staffs. And so asking these questions of what does access in worship mean, and what does it look like to be a congregation that truly embraces people of all bodies and minds, and these kinds of things are questions I've asked pragmatically from kind of the pastor's seat, if that makes sense. And then in the last couple of years as a researcher, again with my colleagues here at Baylor, really diving into what are the kind of things that are going on in our congregations, in our communities around disability. So this is the way that disability has been personal for me. Just in your own minds, I want you to think for a second, where has disability hit your own experience? I'm guessing in a room this size, we could have lots of stories of ourselves, of our loved ones, of people that we know. And here's the thing, is that disability, again, is not kind of this concept. It's an experience that evokes feelings and images and emotions. So for you, it could be that the idea of disability or the experience of disability is full of curiosity. It could be full of unsurety. It could be full of fear or unknown. It could be something that you think of in a positive way. It may evoke images of ramps and parking spaces. It could be elderly people in your life. I mean, any number of different things. But I just want to emphasize this, is that none of us comes with a blank slate, right, to this topic. We all, whether we've thought a lot about disability in the past or not, we all actually do have some kind of thought, some experience with this. So as we go through kind of this this hour, just be thinking about, like, how does this intersect with my own experience personally, around me, in society of disability? Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so I promise we're going to define disability, sort of, okay? So if you really like nice, neat, tight definitions, you may be disappointed, but that's okay. So before going to some other ways of defining, I actually want to point out that disability in some ways is nowhere in Scripture in the Bible, and in some ways is all throughout Scripture in the Bible. What do I mean by that? That doesn't make sense, Jason. Please explain it. Okay, I'll try to. So the concept, the term of disability as we use it today to kind of refer to all these different experiences, that term does not exist in the Bible. So there's not, a passage in Luke where Jesus says, now let's talk about those with disabilities, and names, autism and Down syndrome and paralysis. Like, that doesn't happen. But what we do find is that if we read back, so this is a little bit of an anachronistic thing, so reading back into something that, we kind of have our lenses on and looking backwards. There are lots of stories, and I've just pulled out a few examples that seem to interact with what we would think of as disability life experiences today. These are just a few examples. And by the way, there's a mixture of what we would think of as sort of not so positive stories and positive stories. One of my favorites is in Genesis 32 when Jacob, who's one of the founding fathers of the Israelite clan, wrestles with God, and through that wrestling leaves with a limp. A limp or a disability in his hip, which is something I have also too. Not from wrestling with God, it's from a tumor, but he actually leaves as a sign of his favor, which is kind of interesting. We have examples of many people think Paul was probably blind or had low vision. There's good reason to think that. There's the story of Jesus and the man born blind, and this question of there's a few, but this question of who sinned, right? And so that's one that's often referenced. There's this parable of the great banquet, where Jesus says, we're going to have a party and go find everybody, even those who might not normally be included in a feast, and includes people with disability experiences. And then also, Jesus' resurrected body has scars, right? So bears the marks of what we would think of as maybe imperfections in our society, right? So Jesus himself kind of has these scarred disability experiences, we might say. So just a few examples to say that it's in there, but it's not exactly defined. So what is disability? Well, I'll quote the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which you may have heard of before. And this is how the ADA defines it. It defines a person with a disability as someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So, a person with disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Now, if we were going through a semester-long class, what we would do is we'd probably talk about this for a while, and then next class session, we would come in with a different definition from, say, the World Health Organization, or from people who are self-advocates and would say, no, this is actually not a helpful way to think about disability because it only frames disability as what you cannot do. What about what you can do, right? We could go through and deconstruct all these different things. But this is sort of a legal definition of what disability means. Some people will use more medical terminology to think about diagnoses, right? Some will use, again, kind of this idea of a social understanding of disability. So it's not so much that my condition or my body is disabled, but the world is disabling in the sense that it prevents me from being in certain places that I could otherwise, if there was just a way for me to do it. Does that make sense? Lots of ways we could define disability, which is part of why it is so challenging to do so. But what I want to focus us on is less about the what is disability than the who is disability. It's been said that if you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. And so it's also true that if you've met one family that has a member with a disability, you've met one family with a member with a disability. Disabilities can involve physical disabilities, mobility-related, congenital limb difference. Some people are born with limb differences. Intellectual disabilities, like I've referenced Down syndrome a couple times, fetal alcohol syndrome, there's many. And then developmental disabilities can include intellectual disabilities, but are not necessarily only that. These are disabilities that are around from birth. So cerebral palsy is an example of this. Autism is an example of this. And oh, by the way, like in my case, disabilities can be from birth or they can be acquired later on in life from illness, from accident, from aging, all over the place. So I hope that you are getting a sense of where I'm going with this. If we take all of those different disability experiences in the United States and we think about households, about 1 out of every 3 households in the United States is impacted in some way directly by the experiences of disability. 1 out of 3. So in a room like this, 1 out of 3 people, right? I mean, that's not 0, right? So where 2 or 3 are gathered, if you have 3, you have somebody who's in a household that is impacted by disability in some way. I think the takeaway that I would leave us with in this part is we're kind of, again, thinking about what are we talking about here? And this is really critical when we talk about disability. Is disability an abnormal part of the human experience? Or is actually disability kind of an ordinary part of the human experience? And the way that our churches sort of implicitly or explicitly respond to this question shapes a lot about how we approach ministry and leadership and inclusion and belonging and these kinds of things, right? Is disability this unusual thing, or is it actually quite ordinary? And I hope that you now see that I think it's quite ordinary. Fair enough. All right. Going to move on to some research. We doing okay? All right. So, research snapshot on disability and the church. Again, we're going to stay at kind of a high level here. We won't dive too deeply, but I want to give you an idea. You may not care about this, but I think it's interesting. I made the slides, so I'm going to tell you. But there's just a whole bunch of different research areas that my colleagues and I are working on in our center. And I've just listed a few. We're going to dive into a few of these, but just some examples of the kinds of things that are really quite, there's not a lot known about these kinds of things in the general kind of field, but we're trying to do some work on, which is really creative about. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if this is going to make sense. Is there what is the baseline that's considered normal and not disability? I've been thinking through this, and I'm like, okay, how do you determine if someone is disabled if you don't have a baseline to compare them to? So I'm wondering what the baseline is.
So the question is, how do you define disability if there's not clarity on sort of what baseline normal human functioning is? Is that fair?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I want to come back to that later. That's a really good question.
I think I have an answer maybe.
Oh, sure.
The Social Security Disability Administration has a blue book. It's a law on what is qualifiable for a disability for the Social Security Administration. So there's actually a law book by the Social Security Administration that says this is a qualifying disability or this is not.
And that would be an example of one approach to answering that question.
Yeah.
So I do kind of want to come back to that in a second, but let me just say this real quick. The answer is, and this is going to be so university whatever of me, it depends who you ask.
Yeah.
The truth is it depends who you ask. And it's such a good question. One of the challenges in this space is that our society has, over time, and certainly today, has implicitly sort of defined this idea of the normative or normal person. And one of the things I hope to nudge you towards by the end of this is that maybe that doesn't exist. We'll come back to that, okay? There you go. How's that for a little teaser for later? Okay, so that was great. So just some areas of research that we're looking into. Again, my colleagues and I at Baylor. So we have some studies on trying to better understand the spiritual lives of youth, young adults, and adults with disabilities, their participation. And by the way, when I say their, I really mean our, right? I'm part of this community. But I'll just use their as a general. We're looking into the ministry practices and approaches of pastors in this type of ministry. What do church websites communicate about disability to people, about what might be offered, what might not be? We're looking at the church experiences of parents and families with kids with disabilities. We're looking theologically as what do pastors actually believe about disability? How do they interact with Scripture and these kinds of things? What do they draw upon in their ministry? We're looking at respite programs. Anybody familiar with respite programs around disability? Yeah, so some of you, your churches may even have these. We're looking at the impact of those. We'll talk about this one in a second, but what does it look like for churches to move and to transform and to become different, and what are churches even supposed to be aiming at when it comes to inclusion and belonging for disability? We're looking at those kinds of things. And then lastly, although there's more, I just ran out of room on the slide, we also have some work on multisensory and accessible worship practices. So a couple things. We like to stay busy. What I want to do in this time is just pull out, again, like 3 strands of this. So if you see one of those things that are still in the black letters and you're like, oh, I wish we were talking about websites, just come up to me afterwards and I'd love to tell you about church websites. But we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the practices of pastors, some of the experiences of families with kids with disabilities, and then a little bit more about kind of what might we be aiming at as a church, possibly, in these areas. All right, so here they are, kind of 3 different little strands I want to lay out there. And I want to start with the pastors. Not because they're more important, just because that's what I want to start with. Okay. Really quick background. What we are doing is we actually have a couple different large national surveys that are going on of pastors all across the country. And if you may not care about this next thing I'm going to say at all, but you might, and so I'm going to say it anyway, again, because I feel like it's important. But this is the first national ecumenical study of pastors and their approaches to disability, meaning there have been some done on like maybe just Protestants or just this group, but we kind of canvassed a nationally representative sample, meaning it represents the general population of where people go to church. So not just of churches, because if you think about this, the average church is a relatively small church in the United States, but the average person attends a large church. You see how that works? If you have a church of 1,000 people, it takes 10 100-person churches to make that, right? So the average person actually goes to a larger church than the average size of church. Does that make sense? So what we did is pull out an actual sample of where people go and are part of churches to the extent that they are. So, and we had almost 400 different pastors respond to this. Every state, different denominations, traditions, Catholic, Protestant, all the above. And we addressed a bunch of different topics. We won't dive into all of these, but trying to get a sense of their demographics, what's the involvement like, according to them, of people with disabilities at their church. How confident are they serving people with disabilities? We'll get to that in a second. What are the barriers they perceive to exist in this kind of ministry? How do they view disability, and what do they think are resources that they need, and lots more. All right, so I want to, again, just zoom in on one kind of specific thing here. To pull out. And by the way, this study is like currently, so it's closed. We've done our data collection, and we are analyzing it like right now. So there's no publications out there about this, but literally like this afternoon at 2:00, we have a regular research team meeting. So this is like happening right now as we go. So if you have any academic journals you subscribe to in 2026, be on the lookout for that. But we'll be pushing out in other ways too. But I want to kind of zoom in on one area, and that's we asked pastors about how confident they are in ministering amongst disability. And here's how we did that. We provided a whole bunch of different kind of ministry activities, and we asked them, from not at all confident to very confident, and then a scale. How do you feel about the following? So, how confident are you answering theological questions related to disability? I'm going to read through these. I'll give you an idea. Connecting with disability organizations in my community. Encouraging friendships among people with and without disabilities. Finding or preparing our volunteers to serve people with disabilities. Helping people with disabilities discover and use their spiritual gifts. Knowing what language to use when talking about disability. Making people with disabilities feel welcome and loved. Making worship services accessible to people with disabilities. preaching about disability, promoting awareness about disability among all our congregants, reaching out to unchurched people with disabilities in the community, supporting the faith formation of people with disabilities, and I think one more, yep. Supporting the involvement of people with disabilities in all our events. So this isn't to say these are the only things that churches do or pastors do, but try to get some basics out there and say, how do you feel about this? Whether or not you yourself are on a church staff, I mean, even like think for yourself, like how would I kind of score myself? The goal was not to say everybody should be 100% very confident or something, but just to get an idea. Are there clusters? Are there areas? And to give you an example, that I think is important for people like me who do research in this area to remember is that though we kind of aggregate these things together and get a big picture, it's really a collection of anecdotes. So this is literally just one example that we pulled of one pastor of a relatively large church. And they said, I feel very confident in making people with disabilities feel welcome and loved, supporting the faith formation of people with disabilities, encouraging friendships. And then here's the areas I feel less confident in. And that's kind of what you expect, is that there's a few things of I feel pretty good about this, and then there's a cluster of things that maybe not so much. I think any of us would be that way, right? So just keep in mind that these are people. But when you zoom out, there are some interesting things that emerge. So this is going to magically show you the order of how these shook out. And I want you to not, if you're a big numbers person, don't worry too much about the percentages of the greens and reds. But to show you kind of the proportion, on the top with the more red are those who said I feel less confident in this area, either not at all or just a little bit. And then if you see more green, that kind of corresponds to I feel very confident or somewhat confident, which are kind of the two there. So the number one kind of area of confidence for pastors that took our survey was this idea of making people with disabilities feel welcomed and loved. Kind of interesting, kind of encouraging. And again, these are self-report kinds of things. We're just asking them. The second category kind of has to do with, I misplaced my notes here. Kind of has to do with this area of relational discipleship, I would call it. So helping people with disabilities discover spiritual gifts, supporting faith formation, these kinds of things. Look, though, at this area of not so much confidence. Maybe in, this is a loaded term, but kind of in these outreach sort of spaces of reaching out to unchurched people with disabilities in the community, connecting with disability organizations in the community. Not so much confidence there. There's this, again, kind of area of mobilizing people, of training and equipping and mobilizing. And then, again, kind of an area of a little bit less confidence is in how do we talk about disability? Preaching, answering questions, promoting awareness amongst us. Kind of interesting how this kind of shakes out. So much we could dive into there, but I want to, again, kind of draw back one thing that we'll revisit later. The area of most confidence in our survey, and actually this bears out and matches some other things that we've seen elsewhere, is the idea that if I'm a pastor, I'm likely, in the United States, I'm likely to think that people with disabilities are going to feel welcome at our church. That's a reality that we find. And in our study is more than 9 in 10, it's actually about 93%, that said that they thought this was true. Okay, so hold that. That's one strand of research. All right, let's go to the next one, and we'll pick up that strand in a second again. Let's talk about our work on families. So, in our Faith, Family, and Disability study, which is very directly named, Faith, Family, and Disability, that's what it's about. In this particular study, what we've done is survey a whole bunch of parents in Texas. So this is not a national study, this is statewide. But 330 participants, and we asked them about the barriers to participation in their churches, how they're involved, how they feel while they're at church. We'll zoom in on that in a second. What are the resources they need? And by the way, these are people who either are currently involved in a church, members of a church, whatever it might be, or have been recently. So this is not people just in general. This is people who would think of themselves as somewhat connected to a church in order to make sense of the questions we ask them. So that's what this was. And really just this question of what are the church experiences of parents of children with disabilities? What's it like for them? So we asked these parents to tell us basically or how did we phrase this? We said select up to 5 words that best capture your own feelings while at church. So we gave them a bunch of feelings, which I'll show you right now, and we said choose 5, up to 5, that describe how you feel when you go to church. So here are the words that we gave as choices. Anxious, don't worry, it's alphabetical, so they're not all like bad words or something. Anxious, befriended, see, I told you. Confident, connected, defensive, disappointed, drained, embraced, excited, excluded, frustrated, grateful, hurt, included, invisible, isolated, judged, known, lonely, loved, misunderstood, refreshed, relaxed and reluctant, seen, supported, unwanted, and valued. And you can even think, again, for yourself, like, how do I feel when I am part of church kinds of things? And we know what we hope for. We know sometimes the realities are mixed. And again, it's not to say, and so what we hoped for was to see every single good word, sort of at the top and every bad word. But just to say, like, how do parents talk about what it's like to be at church? And if we give them only 5 words, what do they choose? Again, kind of think for yourself how you would. So here's what we have learned. It turns out that there's a big difference based on one thing, and that is depending on how parents responded, is my church engaged in intentional disability ministry? And we did not define that, by the way. We didn't say, and by the way, intentional disability ministry means a program or a this or a that, or is it good or bad? Like, we didn't do any of that kind of thing. We just said, is your church engaged in intentional disability ministry? And we just kind of left it broad. Does that make sense? So these are the top feelings of parents who said, my church is not engaged in intentional disability ministry. And look at these top few. Anxious, misunderstood, lonely. You see loved up there, which is interesting. Isolated, judged, and drained. Watch what happens when we now filter out those who said our church is engaged in some type of intentional disability ministry. Here are the words that were chosen. Grateful, supported, still anxious, interesting, loved, embraced, included, still drained. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is too easy, Jason. Like, now you're not so fast. Did you notice that there's still a little bit of a mix even in the top? And by the way, somebody could feel all of these things. We said give us the 5 that most resonate with you. Like, what are the things that most quickly come to mind? But notice the difference that parents themselves, again, we didn't try to prime them and say, make it seem good if your church is intentional. This is just what came up. So there does seem to be something about intentionality in ministry when it comes to disability. And there are more things we found that point to that. So we also asked, little delay there. One more. There we go. We also asked them to talk about if they feel supported well at church, if they're developing relationships, if they feel a sense of belonging, are they growing in their faith? This is about the parents themselves. Do they enjoy church? And so the red here represents those who said our church is not engaged in intentional disability ministry, and the green is those churches that were. And you know what's going to happen because I'm presenting it. And again, don't get too obsessed with like which percent and how much difference. Just notice the patterns. Developing relationships, a difference. Sense of belonging, we see a difference. Growing in their faith, we see a difference. Enjoying church, we see a difference. We would love all of these probably to be 100%, again, for everybody. But again, notice, like, what are the things that make a difference in the way that we minister? This does tell us something, doesn't it? But how about the way that parents perceive, and again, these are generally younger children, perceive the impact on their kids? Well, we see really similar things. Look at that difference. And supported well without having intentionality and with intentionality. Developing relationships. Are the kids developing relationships amongst their peers? Do our kids have a sense of belonging? Are our kids growing in their faith? Do our kids enjoy church? So it seems like there is something about intentionality. By the way, in the way that the parents perceive it, right? So if a parent says, I can tell we're being intentional, it makes a difference. What is at stake? What we begin to see is that there's a couple of different stories that emerge among families. And so it's not just one. So if you are a pessimist and you're like, it's all terrible, I have bad news for you. If you're an over-optimist, everything is rosy and amazing, I have bad news for you. Really, we see stories of both welcome and wounding within churches. And it's about a little over half have talked about remaining at their churches because they felt embraced, but almost half have left at least one congregation. Another, I think, third of that have left more than one congregation. Specifically, they say because our kids were not welcome at that church. So you see these two diverging stories around intentionality. So, kind of again, zooming out, nearly half of families with a disabled child have left a church because of a lack of welcome. That's not just because the music was too loud or they thought it smelled funny or who knows what. They didn't like the carpet. It was for that specific reason. So that's one strand. Remember, putting it, and we'll do more of this in a little bit, but go back to our pastor finding. More than 9 in 10 pastors feel somewhat or very confident about making people with disabilities feel welcome and loved. Half of parents are saying, I can't be at the church. What's going on? All right, let's move on. We doing good so far? It's making sense? Okay, cool. All right, let's talk about churches. So we have another study, surprise, surprise, where we're asking about what are the ways that churches change and the short story of that is it's complicated. Because sometimes churches are always changing, just not always in the ways that we notice or that we hope. That's for free. That's not related to what we're doing right now. But really looking at what are the markers of churches in terms of those who are moving towards a place of greater belonging for people with disabilities. So that's kind of a guiding question. And one of the ways that we're exploring that is through a study where we gathered just a few months ago at a large conference. Over 100 different, we had lots of, there were pastors, there were people leading like church ministries, people leading nonprofit like parachurch ministries, people with disabilities, their family members. And a lot of these are people who are kind of engaged in direct work with churches like at denominational levels and this kind of stuff. And we pulled them together and we said, hey, we bet there's a lot of collected wisdom about like, what are the things that get churches to move in a good direction, in a faithful direction, and how would you know if it was happening? Like, how would you know if it worked? So we asked these questions. We gathered them all together, over 100, 2 different gatherings, and they generated a lot of ideas, almost 500 different, like, specific things. So when I say it's complicated, I really mean that. It's complicated, which is encouraging. This is another one of those where we're kind of doing some initial, kind of parsing through and analyses. But I wanted to share here, there's more than 4 themes, okay, that are coming up. But I want to share with you the 4 that are coming up the most and the most strongly that I think are really interesting and I wanted to share. So what are some of the markers of churches that are doing faithful work around disability, possibly? I think there might be something, by what we're finding, around these 4 themes. And by the way, depending on who you are, you're either going to go, wow, really? You had to do a study to tell us this? Or you're going to say, wow, I hadn't thought of that. Or maybe a mix of both. But sometimes that's the fun of research, is it's like, oh yeah, this kind of seemed true, and here's some nuance, but it actually does hold. So here are 4 themes to kind of pay attention to when it comes to what does a faithful church look like when it comes to disability, inclusion, and belonging. Seems like there are 4 things that people come back to over and over again. First one is the nature of church leadership. What are the ways in which leaders, pastors, board members, whoever it might be, are setting a tone? And what kind of tone are they setting? Humility, flexibility, curiosity, listening posture. We did not have anybody that I know of say they need to be the most competent, charismatic CEO, strategic person. Turns out that's not something people name when they talk about this stuff. They do talk about openness, though. How do you respond when somebody brings a challenging situation? Are you curious? Are you flexible? So church leadership is the first thing. Second one is the actual culture of the congregation. I didn't put this up here because it felt like it would be unprofessional, but I almost called this the vibe of the church. So this is really about the vibe, the culture of the church. And particularly in this way, it seems important, is a culture that really highlights mutuality, common humanity, friendship, not just charity. So a lot of times what you find is that when churches will say, oh, like we pay attention to disability, it's very charity-minded. So it's a power dynamic of those without disabilities only ever serving or giving to those with disabilities and never the other way around where there's no mutuality, right? So that was something that came up over and over again, was the importance of mutuality in the congregational culture. That's the second thing. Third thing is accessibility, and this is really simple. Can people get to the space where you meet? If they can't, that's a pretty big red flag. And once they're there, are they able to fully participate? And so are there supports, are there guides along the way to encourage participation? That's a really important thing, accessibility. And then the fourth one is, where do people with disabilities themselves show up within the congregation? And particularly in areas where people with disabilities are able to contribute and lead and serve. And so it seems like there's something about these four sort of markers, indicators. What's church leadership like? What's their posture? What's the kind of nature of the culture, of the vibe of the congregation? When we gather, is it accessible in every way? And are people with disabilities leading in a meaningful way? So, oh, we're doing so great on time. This is amazing. Okay, we're going to have a great discussion after, or we can all just go to lunch. A few more things here, though. So what are we learning about the church and disability? I really do hope that you also are just kind of taking away some things, because I certainly do along the way. But I want to, again, just distill it down to a few things that I find really fascinating. So what are we learning? When it comes to ministry, it's great to feel confident or assured in the sense of, yeah, we're doing things really well at our church. But turns out that confidence does not equal faithfulness or effectiveness. In other words, sometimes we don't know what we don't know, for those of us in ministry leadership. I'm sure that can resonate with any of us on any number of levels, but we know that that is true when it comes to disability. So confidence is not the same thing as actual, effective, faithful, good ministry. So that feels like an important thing to pull out. Second thing, intentionality in ministry really does make a difference. Now, really need to put a little caveat on this. Intentionality according to who? Back to that first one, right? Intentionality according to, in our case, those with disabilities and their family members. To the extent that people and families like mine can say, yes, we're being intentional, then you see the difference. Does that make sense? So intentionality really does matter. This is not going to go in a paper or anything else, but I just keep coming back to this over and over again. Boy, wouldn't it be nice if there was a magic wand? For lots of different reasons, but in this area, wouldn't it be nice if there was a magic wand and a nice little spell that we could say and just wham and be done with it, right? And like, oh, everybody feels really good and belongs, and we figured out all the barriers, and all of our church buildings are on one story. We don't have to worry about stairs and elevators, and wouldn't that be great, right? Turns out nobody is able, bless you, is able to identify the magic wand. I would submit to you it's because there is not one. And so what we often find is that there can be discouragement amongst pastors, ministry leaders, people in churches, that why is this so difficult? Why can't we just figure out that one thing? Why is it that we're still kind of spinning in the same places over and over again around some of this stuff? I hope it encourages you. It's because there is no one magic thing. There really is not. If there was, I would hope that we would have found it, and I'd be telling it to you right now. But there's not a magic wand for creating belonging around disability. But I do think there are a lot of different reasons for hope in this area. And that's born out of not just personal experience of what I've seen even in Waco, Central Texas, and beyond, but within the very people that we have done research with. I got to give you a little quick anecdote because we've got plenty of time. One of my colleagues, the executive director of our center, Eric Carter, has been doing research in this area for a long time and trainings and things. And I was in a meeting with him months ago, so I hope this is recorded now, so I guess if he ever finds out about this, I hope it's okay I'm sharing. It's okay. It's a good thing. We had another person at Baylor who said, Eric, how many churches across the United States are doing disability ministry? I like, what a big, I was like, oh, I wonder what he's going to say, because like, there's not data on that. And Eric immediately says 100%. Were you expecting that? I wasn't expecting that. And he said 100%. Every church, if it has a handful of people, is ministering amongst people with disabilities. Back to that whole, is this abnormal or is it ordinary? He said, most just don't realize it. And most are not intentional about it. Does that make sense? And so that's really, I think, what our work is trying to kind of drive us toward, is not that this is some brand new thing that now must come out of the sky and we've never, it's actually, there's probably things going on in our midst that connect with some of this. It's just how do we bring focus, intentionality, and clarity around where we're going. Fair enough? So lots of reasons for hope. All right. Now I promised you some exhortations, some challenges, some encouragements, and now we're going to get to them, and then we can chat a little bit. So remember these 4 kind of markers of what might signal faithful ministry within our churches around disability: church leadership, congregational culture, accessibility, and the role of people with disabilities. I want to just, again, kind of provide a couple of suggestions, ideas, wonderings, musings around each of these. And I want you to know that I hesitated to include this section because I know that a temptation that we can all have, well, you probably don't, that I have, in these kinds of workshops is when somebody gets too specific and prescriptive, like you must do this, and it's like, oh, okay, checklist, have I done it or not? I want you to know that's not the spirit in which I'm offering these things. But the other voice in my head was like, sometimes in workshops like this, it can feel so kind of like up in the air that it's like, but what would be a first step I could even take? And so it's in that spirit that I want to throw some things out to you. Does that make sense? We're understanding each other? Great. Okay. So around the idea of church leaders, again, this might be you because you might be a leader in your church. And by the way, that can be the lead senior pastor, but leaders come in all shapes and sizes, whether we're volunteers and serve in some way, whether we're on staff, whether we serve in a committee or a board, whether we just are a member and are entrusted in some way with leadership. There's lots of things that we can do. But what would it look like to listen and to model as church leaders? So listen. Again, this is really specific, but I don't know. What would it look like to share a meal intentionally with a person with disabilities once a month? And by the way, not in a way that is transactional, like, hey, you have a disability, I need to have lunch with you. Jason said. No, not like that. If you want to buy me lunch, but in a way that is, if I met one person with a disability, I met one person with a disability, and I want to know your story. Can I share mine with you? How else do we get to this place of mutuality unless we sit around tables? I mean, honestly, y'all. So that's a piece of it. So what would it look like? I mean, once a month. How many meals do you eat in a month? Think about it. So, and it doesn't have to be a meal. It can be anything. Yeah, go ahead.
So that's what I like about Church Under the Bridge. We do that every week. We got people in wheelchairs. We got people with walkers, and we got buses that go pick up the people. And so that's what I like about Church Under the Bridge. And you feel love, and anybody can participate. Like they got people that do the music. Everybody's got something to do.
Love it.
All kinds of stuff.
Church Under the, and lots of churches, but Church Under the Bridge is a great example of if people with disabilities didn't show up, there wouldn't be church, right? And that's actually true of most of our churches, but but I love it. Yeah, that's right.
They know that there were, you said, a lot of handicapped people, different things, and they said, because the other churches, like you say, they shone them like that, and right there, I mean, it is so great to see people that, there's regular people that can get up and go to church that don't. They'd rather sleep in, and these people, they come on bicycles, they come on wheelchairs, they come on motorcycles and whatever,
That's so good.
It's amazing.
It's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's great. So listening in whatever capacity, right? And for some of us, maybe that just happens meeting a new person at church on a Sunday. I mean, who thought of that? Okay, so that's listening. But I also want to throw out this exhortation of modeling. And I've given one very specific idea here, and this is a more niche kind of thing. But anecdotally, I've found that there's something that happens in the unscripted, unplanned, responsive kind of moments around disability that shape culture in ways that every training, every desire to be intentional never could. And I'll give you one example, and that's the one I put here. So if you're ever somebody who speaks in your church, gives announcements, leads singing, leads a small group, or is part of a small group, and it doesn't have to be just with a microphone or something. The question is, what do we do with disruptions? Because, my friends, here's the reality, is people with disabilities are disruptive sometimes. And I'm using that word in air quotes, disruptive. The 15-year-old with autism is verbalizing during the message, or the person who just really can't sit still is moving around a lot and is really having trouble, like just kind of being in their seat, right? Or whatever it might be. Here's my question. Are we prepared in those off-the-cuff moments to see the present bodies of our brothers and sisters as distractions from the main thing, or as holy evidence of, wow, how amazing that we're all gathered here together? If you have ever been in a church service where somebody from up front or a small group or somebody gave the kind of awkward, y'all have seen the look of kind of like can somebody deal with this, you know? Or has shushed or said, hey, can somebody, you have now set back the vibe, the congregational culture in ways that are hard to quantify. Consider, on the other hand, somebody who says, hey, we're so glad that, by the way, this happens with babies all the time, right? We're so happy for this sign of life that's amongst us. What a joy, let's keep going. Or how about just carrying on together? Are people with disabilities, which, by the way, again, if disability is ordinary, really we're talking about just people, are people distractions from the main thing or the main thing? This is something that we have to decide in our churches and act accordingly. And again, I think it comes out in these unscripted, unplanned moments way more than any sort of training can provide. Fair? All right. There you go. There's the church leader exhortations. Okay, let's talk about a couple around congregational culture. I want to encourage y'all to think about planning and training. Planning. Culture is tricky. Okay, so my study is in, my academic study is in organizational leadership and organizational theory. And again, my summary for you, I'll save you a whole bunch of work. It's complicated. Okay, that's the summary of organizations. So changing a culture in any institution, any organization, is a complicated thing. It just is. But what are some things that can be done that can foster a different kind of culture, a different kind of vibe, if you will? Well, one way is to do some planning. So think about the next, and again, it could be big scale, small scale, it could be whatever. The next event or gathering or potluck or special service or whatever, what would it look like to get together a group of people that plans around assuming folks with disabilities are going to be here, and let's plan for mutuality and friendship, not charity. And that starts with kind of who's present at the table, right, which we'll get to in a second. So what would it look like to plan ahead in that way? How do we foster moments of true mutuality, of true friendship, for possibility for that kind of exchange? So that's one. And then another one really is in the training. And some of this, by the way, and afterwards I can refer you to some folks who do this really well. It's amazing what can be received, again, just by somebody who's, in our churches, big and small, we have people who are volunteering in some way. Maybe it's getting the coffee ready or getting communion ready or greeting or doing music or goodness knows what. Lots of different things. Are the people that are volunteers in our church, which is really just the people in our church, ready to just be a welcoming presence to whoever may come in. I was at a workshop a couple weeks ago. We had somebody come and speak at Baylor who shared a story of a parent and her autistic child coming into a church service for the first time, and the kid having just a meltdown, as she sometimes did, and the mom just deciding, well, we're not coming back here, obviously. And this experience of one of the greeters, like the assigned greeters, they're supposed to be friendly, and just coming over and getting down nice and low and saying, how can I help? And we're so glad you're here. And that posture of what great evidence that the body of Christ has gathered today, and equipping our our volunteers to perpetuate that kind of a culture, where it's not I hope we don't mess up, but hey, we're all humans. Let's figure out how to do this together. What would that look like? All right, 2 more. Accessibility. I want to encourage you to think about auditing and designing. So auditing, I don't mean like the IRS and finances and that kind of thing. That's not what I'm talking about. Although you should take a look at where you spend your money as a church, but that's a separate thing. No, I'm talking about taking just an honest look around at your space. I'm still surprised, in the sense that I shouldn't be, that it's really not widely known. You know that churches are exempt from ADA compliance. Did you know that? So when the ADA law was passed in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a whole bunch of hullabaloo around churches and religious schools. And the long and short of it is that churches do not have to be ADA compliant. There's no legal requirement for a church building to be ADA compliant. So what that means, and again, that's like has parking spaces and bathroom accessibility, and can you get to different levels and all these kinds of things. So if you're in a church that is not ADA compliant, it doesn't have to be. Just know that. But what that means is that people who are used to navigating the spaces know that we can't necessarily expect or plan on the protections of ADA in this country in churches. So take a look around and see, are there areas where this space that we meet in, whatever that may be, it could be under a bridge, it could be this building, it could be any number of things, right? Can everybody get here? And how difficult is it for people to get here and to actually be part of things? Just take an honest look around. When they come here, can they go to the bathroom? Like, these are simple things that actually make a ton of difference. If you've ever been to a building where it's hard to know how to get in, you can't use the restroom, and you can't navigate it, you know how much of a challenge that is, no matter how friendly people are. I refer you back to that picture of me in the wheelchair, right? It was not an accessible sanctuary for somebody in a wheelchair. It just wasn't. The people were lovely. It just had to do with the architecture. So something to think about. And then to design. So, by the way, out of that, taking a look at your space where you meet, you may try to move around some walls or whatever. Who knows? But within the service itself, what would it look like to focus on, one aspect of the service and say, how can we make this a little bit more accessible for everybody? Oh, there's my alarm going off. Oh, we're doing so good. This is great. How can we make this a little more accessible for folks? Maybe that's closed captioning under the slides. Maybe that's when we invite everybody to stand together. We say, stand together as you are able. Or I've heard somebody say, rise in body or spirit. Any number of small things. And try one and see how it goes. And then try another. But design for access and intentionality. Okay, last one. And then people with disabilities. This is really simple. I think you should equip and unleash. So find some folks with disabilities, if you haven't done this already, in your churches, and what would it look like to prepare? And by the way, intellectual, physical, whatever it might be. Try doing some training. Could you get somebody prepared to read a scripture, to preach? To volunteer in some way, in a way that's consistent with their interests, their gifts, all of that. And then, let them do it. And see what happens. I promise you that the worst fears that we often have in these things of somebody's going to mess up something are almost never founded, other than sometimes it's us who just feel uncomfortable. And by the way, feeling comfortable at church is an okay thing. If you don't believe me, watch Jesus's way of teaching, and lots of people feel uncomfortable. So what would it look like to just train up some folks and let them go and see what happens with support, with ongoing relationship, but to just try some stuff. All right. So in summary, intentionality really does make a difference. And I would ask, like in our churches, what does like maybe a next step of intentionality look like in your context, in our context? And by the way, we do have, I'm wrapping up here. We have some resources. We're not like a resource factory. There's some great ministries out there that do that I'd be happy to connect you with. But we have some stuff as well. If you would like, you already put your name up here. I can email you like a bunch of PDFs of some of our resources and articles and things if you would like. I have a little sheet up here if you're interested in that. But lots of good stuff, and that's kind of it from me. So we have 15 minutes technically. I'd be happy for Q&A, conversation, or if you're like, great, sweet, time for lunch, you can go and be offended. But that's what I got. So yeah, questions, discussion on whatever. Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned cancer. Are you cancer-free?
Oh, thank you for asking. So for my type of cancer, what they call me is no evidence of disease. So I've been no evidence of disease for 5 years. So thanks for asking. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. As anybody who's had cancer knows, we live scan to scan. So my scans are a year apart now. So went from 3 months to 4 to 6 to a year. So yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah. Yeah, please.
I just wondered about the name, the Center for Disability and Flourishing, and I know Baylor's involved in a kind of a meta research program on the human flourishing. Is this information getting woven into that, or is that part of it?
It's a great question. Yeah, so Baylor, some of our colleagues in another area have a really big, it's called the Global Flourishing Study. And it's kind of trying to figure out what does flourishing look like across the globe. And that's, what does that mean? And so we are in close conversation. We even have a project or two that's somewhat shared. I would think of the name here as a little bit independent, but like a spiritual cousin of that. And a lot of it is because how often do you see the words disability and flourishing together?
That's what made me ask
Right.
the question, because it just made me think, oh, they're doing that big project, and so many people are we just studying people that we consider abled, or is this part of it? So
That's spot on. Things that I won't resolve for you, but is there such thing as a healthy disabled person? Is there such thing? Well, actually, these are real questions come up. Is it better to have a disability or to not exist? These are real questions in society today, right? Is it possible to have a flourishing, thriving, faithful life with a disability? We think it is, but yeah. Anyway, sorry, yeah, in the back, yeah.
I was going to ask, I have to go. Do you have anything that I can bring with me so I can continue learning about this while I go?
Yes. Give me your name and email, and I will send you so many PDFs that you will say, why do I have so many PDFs? Cool, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the language you used about, there's way more disabled people in our church than we realize, so that's helpful. But sometimes I think as we're trying to learn and grow, a lot of times we're looking at the obvious, like maybe a wheelchair or maybe you see a physical challenge, whatever. So then in our context, what I sometimes hear, we don't see that much of that. So then people kind of, well, it's only a few people. So you have other language that also helps with that thought process or mindset. Because we're not seeing it. We don't realize as much. It's more than what we realize. So I'm just looking for other language.
Yeah, you
that
can
may
just
be
say that.
helpful to help people.
To make sure I understand your question, what I'm hearing you say is it's not so hard to point out people with a mobility device, a wheelchair, a cane, like there it is. But in some of these cases in which disability is a little bit less apparent, how do we maintain awareness?
But we don't think, well, there's only one person. Why do we need to make a big program or something?
Yeah. There's only one person. Why do we need to make a big thing? I have two quick thoughts I want to say to that. It's a great question that comes up everywhere. One of the things that this is just Jason. This isn't like I mean it's based on the stuff, but it's just me. So look, one of the things that a lot of our churches have to grapple with is this idea, and this is, by the way, if you bring this to a pastor or a board, you may get a weird look if you say this. Okay, I'm just warning you. But to what extent does our church think too much about return on investment? Do you hear what I'm saying? Think too much about return on investment. That is a capitalist, Western, my pastor would say mammon-based way of thinking about the world and our churches, which is not biblical or faithful to the gospel.
Agreed.
I'm reminded of this parable about 99 and 1. Okay? So this is so common. This is like pervasive. But I think a baseline issue that we've got to get at is how do we define who is worth going after? And if we are just kind of chewing and swallowing the way the world defines that, we're already in a bad spot. So I just want to say that. It's so pervasive, and it's a bedrock issue around this. And disability is not the only thing where that makes a big difference, but that's a thing. Okay, there's that. The second piece, this is where I think the presence and the invitation and like what would it look like to, what would it look like to have intentional conversations with people who are known to maybe have these less apparent, kind of disability experiences, neurodiversity experiences, whatever it might be, and find out just what's it like for you. We know that a lot of the population has these experiences. We also know, I didn't get into this, that people with disabilities across the United States, this is actually really new data, tend to value their spiritual lives in the same rates as the general population, but are much less likely to be participating in a faith community. So part of the question is, why aren't they here? And what is it that we might do? Because if we reflect the actual neighborhoods around us, we're going to have these folks because it's just us, right? It's just humanity. So are there things that maybe we're doing where there are some exclusionary things? So anyway, a couple of thoughts. For those who are here, let's have some spaces. Let's talk. And then maybe there are people who just aren't here. This is great stuff. I could talk about this all day, so feel free to. What else? Questions, comments? You can push back on anything too. I'm just going to say, hey, it's research. You can't be mad. Just kidding. Don't get mad at the data. Yeah.
I was at a choir concert last night at my daughter's school, the high school, and they said this was the cerebral palsy month or whatever.
Oh.
And they allowed one of the students with cerebral palsy to give a monologue that she wrote about how she is embracing now her disability.
Wow.
And she did it in front of the whole, presentation, just saying how I am no different than anybody else. I am a beautiful, wonderful person that God created, and it was just a beautiful thing to see this person talk about how their disability is just like everybody else.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful thing. But I just want to mention
That's
her name.
powerful.
Crystal Mendoza was her name. It was
Huh.
beautiful.
That's powerful.
Waco High School.
What a powerful testimony.
It was huge.
Yeah, that's amazing. And in a way that doesn't have to apologize or whatever, right? But just says like, this is me. This is the body God. Maybe not in that context, but this is the body God gave me. And
It was good.
yeah, that's awesome. Cool. And any others? Any last ones? Should I let you go? Yeah.
Could you
Last
talk
one.
a little bit about the language we use around,
Oh,
as
sure.
people who are churched?
Mhm.
I'm thinking about the way we talk about when people will be in heaven and
Oh goodness. Yeah.
they'll be healed, and in some ways I think it can come across to people a little bit like, and we won't have to bother with all of you
Yeah.
anymore. That kind of
a
language.
great
So how
question.
do we
Yeah.
how do we
Mhm.
recognize that and maybe push back against
That's such a
it.
good question. Okay, so a couple things that I didn't talk about here that I'll briefly touch on that you brought up is, the way that we kind of talk about disability, just like the language we use, the posture we assume, those kinds of things. And then also the idea of disabilities in heaven is a tricky, I'm just gonna, again, it's complicated in terms of the way that people think about it. But what that speaks to is some of these basic assumptions of what do we think disability is. And remember, we use disability as a word to refer to a lot of these different experiences that are not all the same and are different. Congenital experiences are different than acquired experiences, and so on and so forth. So anyway, all that to say, I think a couple of quick rules of thumb. Are there any places in which we are using disability terms as euphemisms or stand-ins for sin or negative experiences that kind of couple together experiences of disability with bad stuff? For example, a really common one, and don't feel bad if you said this today or whatever, but how often do we associate blindness with lack of awareness? Oh, I was so blind to that. Listen, actually, people with low vision and blindness are some of the most aware folks. So that's doesn't make sense even, right? How about metaphors of paralysis or whatever? So these are things to think about that these kind of seep in. But it rests on this assumption that disability is fundamentally this defection from the norm, right? And so if we have a defection from the norm in heaven, there are no defections. The Bible is quite clear that in eternity, in God's kingdom, pain and suffering have no place. Death has no place. I don't remember seeing anything about everybody being the same height or something, or even exactly what our bodies will be like, or everyone will have a 190 IQ high. I don't actually know. Let's pretend it's really high. Oh, excuse me. Everyone's going to have a really high IQ, or everybody's. And so when we think about disabilities that are really about the kind of core. What is it that makes us skittish about saying this is part of God's diverse world? So there are people who feel very strongly on both sides. There is no way that heaven will have disabilities as we understand them. And some who say, I cannot conceive of a heaven that erases disabilities. I will not try to resolve that for you. But I think we want to be mindful about our language being affirming, taking seriously and respectfully and honoring the person's experience, and not assuming that somebody is suffering from their disability, because oftentimes that's not the case.
Yeah, suffering from that probably needs to be taken out.
Yeah, we don't suffer from Down syndrome. That's just cancer I suffered from, but I don't suffer from being slow. I'm sorry you're impatient for me. So I tell my kids all the time, Dad's just doesn't go as fast. Yeah.
My now ex-husband and I had 2 deaf children, and just for information, when we moved to California, we went to UCLA, and they told us that he, who was Polish, Italian from New York, and I'm Mexican, Native American from here, we both carried the same recessive gene that caused deafness. I had never known that, but anyway, one of the terms that I don't hear too often anymore for our children, my son would have been 60 next February, and my daughter's now 56, but I don't hear it as often. Oh, they're deaf and dumb. And even Billy Graham would always use that. And I didn't like it because now dumb means stupid, where it used to mean that they couldn't talk, which is not right, because I've never met a deaf mute. They can't, I'm sure there are some, but my son was born in New York City, my daughter was born in Fort Worth, we brought them up in Los Angeles, which has the best schools for the deaf. And, I forgot what I was saying.
The language,
The what?
the language.
Deaf and dumb.
Yeah, but, anyway, there, I lost what I was gonna say, but, anyway, there, people don't realize that that's not true, because, even in Fort Worth, the head of the TCU, speech and hearing clinic refused to let anybody use sign language. They had
Oh,
it as
wow.
an oral program, because she would say, you teach them to sign, they'll never learn to talk, which was not true.
Yeah.
Because when we moved to California, it was total communication.
Wow.
Whether they spoke, whether they signed, whether they read lips, finger spell, whatever it was, whatever fit the child. And so it was a very good education. So it
Yeah.
wasn't, that wasn't true at all.
Yeah.
You teach them to sign for both,
Yeah.
well, especially our daughter.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I used to say, oh, no, we turn her to talk so clearly
Yeah.
that because we signed and spoke and everything at home, that sometimes she would say, you know, if she saw a big person, look, Daddy, big, you know,
Yeah.
she's big, and so it's like she had to say that clearly. Or, you know, that's why you just hear it, but anyway,
Yeah.
but that's just one term that was so popular, like I said, with Billy Graham, and I remember going in
Yeah.
and said, you know, that, yeah, dumb was to mean, yeah, ridiculous.
It's associating
And
these,
now-
oh,
yeah,
sorry.
and people don't think of that they can't speak, they just think that they're, you know, slow.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, these associations, and again, it's not like somebody sat down in a church one day and said, let's use these terms. I mean, these are just in the water, right? And so awareness and all that. I'm going to dismiss us, but let's chat afterward. Thank you for coming. If you, seriously, I've got PDFs I'll send you. If you have an email address and want to put it here, I won't spam you other things, I promise. But come on up here.